Welcome to the Murder Media Podcast, where we analyse and overthink true crime media. I am your host, Dr. Stella Marie Gaynor, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram at murdermedia81, that's the numbers 81, and on Facebook or via email at murdermedia81@gmail.com. Hope everyone is really good this week. I'm alright. I'm, working, sleeping, doing some more work. Had Easter bank holiday weekend where I did pretty much nothing, so that was nice in its own way, I suppose, to sit around and do absolutely cock all. So now I'm back to work and I've got lots to do before the next set of marking comes in. So before the next round of all the essays comes in, I've got to write my paper for the Dracula Derby celebration thing. What is it called? I'm looking at a thing on the wall. Dracula, a conference and celebration. There we go. That's in Derby in mid-May. Then I've got Miskatonic in London. I know I've mentioned these before, but I'm just catching up with the stuff that I'm doing, and the more I say it out loud, the more it'll get done, I guess. But I thought that before we get to this week's topic for this week's episode, I thought I'd catch you up on the Murder Media Symposium, which happened on the 11th of April. So it went really well. There wasn't really anything that could have been a massive disaster. I guess nobody could have turned up and it could have just been me in a room with all the coffee. But lots of people came. I was super stressed about it, as anybody who knows me knows that I do wind myself up over stuff that I probably don't need to be wound up about. I was going over in my head all the many, many different things that could go wrong, and none of them were really big, but it was just, you get stuck in your own head, right? So let's start with all of the with the day, and maybe even the night before. So I stayed in Liverpool the night before so that I could be there early in the morning and get to the building and sort everything out and put posters on the relevant doors and make sure the tea and coffee had arrived, all that stuff. So I stayed in Liverpool the night before. I had a hotel booked and I was in the office and I was just getting ready to leave to go to the hotel and to go and just practice and get all my shit together. And I got an email from booking.com, so this is not sponsored, saying that hotel that you should be able to go and check into right now, they've cancelled because they're apparently not a hotel anymore, or the building's closed or something like that. So I entered this spiral of panic thinking that I didn't have a hotel to stay in, and then I read the email properly and they'd actually found me another hotel, but it wasn't booked, so I had to hurriedly book another hotel. So I found another hotel. I went with the one that they suggested and I booked in. Then I walked down and I tried to check in, and so I was getting refunded from the hotel that was cancelled, but that takes a while, like about a week. So I had to pay up front for this new hotel, and it's like, what if I didn't have the money? Like, what if I was on the bones of my arse with money? I actually had my credit card in my wallet, which I don't usually do. I never usually have that out with me. I just keep it for emergencies. But I had that in my wallet, thank fuck, so I was able to pay for this hotel up front. Anyways, I go to the new hotel and I go there and I'm checking in and they want me to pay, and I had to use this credit card, but they wanted a PIN number. It was like, who has the PIN number for the credit card? I certainly don't know it, so I had to faff around trying to get the PIN number, and I kept putting it in wrong. Oh god. Anyway, it all got sorted and I got in and I paid for the hotel on the credit card, and I did get refunded from the other one. Anyway, get the card key, and you know what, in hotels when they put all the cards are blank, aren't they, and then they put the room on the key card. So the lass did that, and I went upstairs to the room and I go up in the lift and I'm walking down the corridor in the hotel had the heating on full blast, so I was really hot and really stressed. And I opened the door to my room, and there was two people in there. There's two Americans sat there, and they're just like, oh right, I guess she gave you room whatever number it was. And I'm like, yeah, this is my room. Get out. And they were like, okay, yeah, we're actually in another room. She invited me in to wait while they repacked their stuff, and I'm like, nah, I'm gonna wait in the corridor. So I'm standing in this hot corridor waiting for these two Americans to fucking repack their stuff so that they can vacate the room that they're not supposed to be in. And then they leave, and they were quite snippy with me as they left, like it was my fault. Like, you're in my room. Anyway, I get in the room. They've left. I'm pretty sure one of them stole some of my tea and coffee as well, because there wasn't as much as there usually is. Get in, lock the door, put the do not disturb sign on the outside of the door. And then I ring down to reception to figure out what's gone on, and she said they'd asked to change rooms because they didn't like the view. So the view out of that room was basically the roof of Lime Street train station, which isn't the nicest view, I admit, but still, I was just trying to be in work and be prepared and go to the hotel and sort of chill out and have a shower and have some food and mentally prepare myself for the next day. And instead, my hotel's cancelled, hurriedly trying to use a credit card that I don't know the PIN number for, and then find two Americans squatting in my room. It was not what I needed for the start of the symposium. Anyway, I managed to get some sleep, which is a miracle in and of itself. No one was due to arrive until 9 o'clock at the earliest, but obviously I'm in the building at like 7:45 and getting everything ready, putting posters up on the door so people knew where they were going, making sure my student helpers were there to register people as they arrived. People started arriving, and some people who were clearly as nervous as I was, so that's nice, isn't it? Misery loves company. And then, yeah, the day proceeded and it was fine. So there was lots of great papers. We kicked off with, in the first panel, we had a paper about AI-generated true crime, which is a whole world of weird. We had a paper on anti-fandoms, and that speaker was looking at stuff like people who critique people who do true crime. So it was a weird sort of layering going on. So that was quite interesting. There was a paper about The Long Shadow from ITV, which I love. I'm going to talk about that in the book. There was loads of stuff about true crime and ethics, which I thought was particularly interesting. Certainly made me think quite hard. Some stuff about serial killers and how they're commodified. There was my paper, of course, which I'll get to in a minute. We had some stuff about satanic panic in Brazil. So two speakers came over all the way from Brazil, which is madness. And then we had another speaker who'd come from Italy to talk about podcasting in Italy, and she sort of mapped out how that looks. We even had a dial-in from India about, the case that's on Netflix. It's called Korean Cyanide is the name of the Netflix doc. She was talking about that, and one of my big fears about the day was that lunch just wouldn't arrive, but it did arrive, so that was good. And then at the end of the day, a few of us went to the pub, so that was nice. It was a nice drink at the end of the day. One of the reasons that I had or did the symposium was, one, research, outreach, impacts, all that blah that we're supposed to do as academics, but it was also to kind of gauge interest in creating a BAFTS special interest group. You say that 3 times, it's very difficult, to bring together people who are interested in researching true crime. BAFTS has a few special interest groups. There's a horror one, there's a science fiction one, there's a documentary one, and so on and so forth, but there isn't a true crime one, and I think there should be. One of the things about it was to get people together to start building a network of true crime scholars and to bring us all together under the banner of BAFTS. Now, some of the people already knew each other from the fan studies special interest group, so that was nice. So it was always nice on the day when some people already know each other, but there isn't a true crime one, so that's what I want to create, and that's what I will be doing over the next few months with the help and support of Bethan Jones. So Bethan is into this, if you're listening. Hi Bethan. She wants to help me do it, so that's something to I guess a watch this space thing on. And I mentioned that at the end of the day, and everybody seemed receptive to the idea and everybody seemed up for it, so that's the next thing to come off the back of that. I was super stressed and super nervous about it, but it happened and it's done, and I did say I'm never doing this again. But when I do create the true crime special interest group, then there will be more events. But the crucial thing will be I won't be doing them on my own. And one of the other things that conferences or symposiums, or is it symposia if there's more than one? I don't know. But one of the things that they're for is that you get to test your research and you start to unravel your ideas and unravel the thoughts that are rolling around in your head and turn them into things that make sense to other people. And in doing that, it helps you to form your ideas and get your ideas to take shape. The vast majority of conference papers that I've done have been the early stages of research that have eventually become published work. So the very first few that I did back in like 2016, 2017 and onwards ended up being bits of my PhD, and then they ended up being later bits of my first book. Then there were conference papers that became chapters in edited collections, which then became the foundations of the larger Murder Media project. The first papers that I did on Conversations with the Killer or Bailey Sarian, they became chapters in published works. At my Murder Media Symposium, and again, I'm really glad it's over, I took that opportunity to unravel some of the stuff that I've been thinking about, that I've been writing bits about, that I've been leaving really irritating voice notes to myself on my phone about, things about serial killers on film, so real life ones, so not Hannibal Lecter or Leatherface, but the films that tell the real life stories of serial killers. The Murder Media book will have a chapter about films, so I decided to knock into shape some of the analysis of 2 of the films in the book chapter and develop that into the paper that I gave. So what I can do now that the symposium is over, now I can develop that paper into a podcast episode. So that's what we're doing today. Films about serial killers. Films that tell the story of these famous dickheads, and because of the shit that they've done, they get films made about them. Immortalising murderers on film, the serial killer movie has been crucial to the development of true crime, or murder media, and the evolution of serial killer into celebrity star. There are a number of fictional screen serial killers based on real life ones. Ed Gein, so there's loads of screen killers based on him. Norman Bates, Leatherface, Buffalo Bill. Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, the film, is loosely based on Otis Toole and Henry Lee Lucas. The early 90s enjoyed a cycle of serial killer films. Silence of the Lambs, Natural Born Killers, Copycat, and they were all inspired by real murder cases. Simpson notes that the serial killer genre is, quote, in a period of recalibration or readjustment, end quote. The Murder Media Project argues broadly that this readjustment is in response to the rise of grassroots or self-startup media flooding the true crime market with alternative, previously unheard voices. So basically, legacy media has evolved and adapted and changed its attitude towards how these stories are told. Narrative films like Ed Gein, The Butcher of Plainfield, Dahmer, My Friend Dahmer, No Man of God, and Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, they all recreate murders with varying degrees of explicit violence and visible gore. But common to all these films are the use of disclaimers or epigraphs at the start, noting that the following film is inspired or based on a true story. These start texts also give grounding information about the story, how many were murdered, or when the killer was eventually arrested. At the end of these films follows an epilogue text noting what happened in the years after the film's story ends. These frequently detail how many years were handed down as a custodial sentence, or when the convicted killer was executed or murdered. Woven into these films are newspaper clippings, footage from news reports on the crimes, actualities which Simpson notes provide the films with a frame of reality. The actors too, says Simpson, who physically resemble the killers, lead the voyeuristic audience into otherwise inaccessible details of the killer's life and crimes. What I'm particularly interested in is how these films fill in the gaps of the tale, how they show us what eventually become the observable crime scenes, or how the films take us into that in-between space, the pockets of time between murders. These films, when taken in aggregate with the other murder media texts that tell the story of a particular serial killer, they function as serial modes of transmedia storytelling. So transmedia storytelling then, I've kind of touched on this, I've mentioned this in the past, but what that is, when you've got a piece of transmedia storytelling or a transmedia story world, it's a massive story that spreads across multiple media platforms where each text adds to the story and the story unfolds across multiple media platforms. So each instalment then is contributing to a larger cohesive narrative. For example, My Friend Dahmer, which we'll get into more detail in a few minutes, tells the story of Dahmer's final year in high school. The 2002 film Dahmer picks out some of Jeff's murders and the quarrelling with his father. Then Conversations with the Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes, unpacks his story after his arrest, and it fills in the gaps with a psychological explanation. My Friend Dahmer and the 2002 Dahmer film offer no real explanations, and the tapes kind of fill this in for us. They add to the cohesive narrative. And then we get Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. This shows us more of the murders, more detail than the 2002 Dahmer film. So for this murder and cannibalism-riddled transmedia story world, the Jeffrey Dahmer story world, Dahmer Monster shows us his life after being convicted and details some of his short life in prison. Dahmer Monster also shows us Dahmer's spiritual awakening and then his eventual murder by, ironically enough, being smashed in the head with a dumbbell. So do you remember Dahmer murdered Stephen Hicks with a dumbbell? Anyway, I'll be investigating murder media through the frameworks of transmedia storytelling in more detail in the Murder Media book and in future episodes of the podcast. This episode, we're going to look at two serial killer films, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, and My Friend Dahmer, and we're going to consider them as biopics or biopic. I'm going to say it differently every time, so whatever. Let's start then with Mr. Personality himself in My Friend Dahmer.
I now present to you Jeff.
Jeffrey. For this, I'm Jeffrey.
Okay, then I present to you Jeffrey Dahmer in his command performance.
Out of the way, Dahmer. Dumbass. I wish I had a best friend.
Jeff's a little off, you know? I think he's kind of hilarious. Hey, Jeff, do you want to come sit at our table? I think that we should form a fan club. With you as our fearless leader, we can really disrupt the school.
Everybody ready?
It has been difficult with your mother, so I moved into a motel.
Take a deep breath. Are you okay?
Hey, Dahmer, it's in the bag.
You seem healthy to me.
What about what's on a patient's mind?
I need to talk about Jeff.
What is this? You wouldn't know about the kids because you're not at home anymore.
You want to talk to somebody about it?
I see things in you that I don't like about myself. I want you to have friends in ways that I never could.
thought you stopped.
Dad always told me what to do, just like you, just like you.
I like bones. It interests me. What's inside?
God, Dahmer, you are such a freak!
He's not a sideshow attraction.
We're just having fun, you know?
Get out of your shell. You need to be more normal.
I'm just like anybody else.
Telling the story of a person's life on film makes it, by definition, a biopic. Bingham explains that a biopic, quote, combines much that is from or of actuality with some that is invented and changed around for dramatic purpose, end quote. My Friend Dahmer is one such biopic, taking us back to the tail end of Dahmer's school years. Adapted from the 2012 comic of the same name by Dirfback Durf, he just goes as Durf, who went to school with Jeffrey Dahmer. We all remember certain kids from high school, I think, remember them from all kinds of reasons. So maybe they had a daft nickname, or maybe we remember someone as being a bit odd or a bit quiet or a bit of a troublemaker. But what if the troubled kid turns out to be this? I imagine it's really weird. And, that's something to consider from a number of angles. And, we can see lots of people try and cash in and take advantage of being somehow close to these crimes, selling stories to tabloids, etc. That was a point that came up at the Murder Media Symposium. But then there are more recent murder media texts that do acknowledge how devastating it is for people close to these crimes who knew the criminals. So in fact, quick side note here, over New Year I read Dark Tide by Edna Cowell. So she was Ted Bundy's cousin. Here he fucking is again. But it's a really good book, and it's really chilling because, of course, as she remembers all this weird shit from when she and Ted were young, but then with what that turned out to be, it's really sad. Anyway, so yeah, it's called Dark Tide by Edna Cowell, and I really recommend it. It's another exploration of how the families of victims, how their lives were shattered, of course, but so were Ted's family. Anyway, what was I about? Right, Dahmer, transmedia, high school, that was it. If we think about murder media and transmedia storytelling, My Friend Dahmer is an origin story for the central character of the Dahmer story world. So I'll unpack transmedia in more detail in a future episode. I mean, I explained it a little bit just now, but I'll unpack it better in a different episode. But for now, think about it as telling a story across multiple media platforms, with each instalment adding something to the story. So broadly, here we can see in these Dahmer texts, when taken in aggregate, they form a transmedia story world. My Friend Dahmer, then. It's an adaptation of the comic of the same name, which is illustrated and written by Dirfback Durf. The film follows a 17-year-old Dahmer, played by Ross Lynch, where in his final year at high school he finds himself with friends. And I'm using the word friend very loosely here. My Friend Dahmer is semi-autobiographical, as Durf himself was one of Dahmer's, quote-unquote friends. A budding illustrator, Durf took inspiration from the young Dahmer, drawing his classmate in bizarre situations. Never really fitting in, Dahmer found that if he played the fool and disrupted class, that this brought him attention that was unlike the usual mocking, scoffing, or the just plain ignoring that he usually got from his fellow students. As Bingham notes, the biopic has a basis in reality and should not be, quote, a simple recounting of the facts of someone's life. It should be an attempt to discover biographical truth, end quote. My Friend Dahmer does tell a story, or a version of the story, of this portion of Jeff's life, and it does have a basis in reality. Durf and Dahmer did go to the same school. Durf did make drawings. Dahmer did act out for the amusement of Durf and the other kids. But My Friend Dahmer does not really attempt to discover any truths, and this is because the truths of Dahmer we might already know from the other many Dahmer media texts, and also, which is probably the stuff that's quite chilling about it all, is that we're never going to really know the truths. Dahmer was murdered in prison. We might never really know why he did what he did. Scholars like David Schmid, Gene Hurley, Peter Vronsky, Mark Seltzer, and me, I guess, have established that serial killers occupy spaces in popular culture much like celebrities, and immortalising them on film only supports this positioning. Celebrity biopics can be, very broadly, broken down into two categories according to Bingham. The first presents idols of consumption, in which the celebrity themselves becomes the product. Films like Ray about musician Ray Charles, or Walk the Line about Johnny Cash. The second category features films that present idols of production. Films like Radioactive about Marie Curie. I always think that title's a bit off, innit? Like, Radioactive sounds like a B movie, like an accident caused someone to become a monster. I don't know. I just think it's a bit off for a film about Marie Curie. Radioactive. Anyway, then we get films like Oppenheimer about Oppenheimer. I'm adding to these two categories then. We've got idols of consumption, idols of production, And I think these films can be idols of murder. So not only is that a great name for some kind of shitty landfill indie band, it also allows us to understand these films as biopic. The serial killer or murderer biopic has an extensive library. Rillington Place, Monster, Carla, You Don't Know Jack. All these films put the serial killer at the centre of the narrative, charting and exploring the life of the subject. These serial killer biopics hit all the markers that Bingham defined as biopic, and these films all narrate and exhibit the serial killer's life. Here's the tricky thing, I suppose. A musician's or scientist's life will be celebrated in their biopic, and, probably rightly so. They did good stuff, right? A serial killer film, while not celebrating, might be understood, and lots have certainly been accused, of glamorising their criminal acts. The biopic, says Bingham, will demonstrate aspects of the subject's life, investigate pertinent moments and motives to do the stuff that they did, and explore the importance of this person to the world, what their contribution was. So Bingham says that the biopic will illuminate the personality and allow the viewer to discover what it might be like to be this person. My Friend Dahmer also hits these marks, but it kind of inverts them, shows us the other side, or the dark side perhaps. So I'm not sure what Dahmer was contributing to this world. Interior design tips? Recipes perhaps? Gross. My Friend Dahmer narrates and exhibits the final year of high school for Jeff, and it puts into order the events in the months before Dahmer commits his first murder. So these are all the markers that Bingham was talking about. My Friend Dahmer presents his home life and his school life, and the film does explore the importance of Dahmer to his world. And it shows us that Dahmer was, of course, largely insignificant. Until Dahmer starts really acting up, when I say acting up, I mean his first murder, it seems he was pretty much invisible. And I guess he was invisible after his first murder because he kept murdering for decades. Anyway, never mind. My Friend Dahmer attempts to, as the biopic should, according to Bingham, allow the audience to discover what it might have been like to be him. So as the teenage feelings of being out of step with everyone else, being jostled by high school jocks in the hall, and engaging in high school pranks, all these things might be relatable. Some of these moments might be recognisable to others, as we see Dahmer trying to navigate high school while he also had a turbulent home life. Framing all of this, My Friend Dahmer brackets these, scare quote, regular moments with fragments that remind us that this biopic, this origin story, ends in serial murder and cannibalism. So for example, Durf and Neil take Dahmer fishing. They stand around in the hazy sun in their shorts, and Dahmer gets a bite on his line. Everyone's pleased, and Neil instructs Dahmer how to get the fish out and how to, most importantly, cut the fish free and put it back. But Dahmer ignores him and stabs and slashes at the fish. Disturbed, Neil and Durf exchange glances, and they're puzzled by this odd behaviour. So we know, the viewers, what followed in the later years, and we know, from knowing what goes on, from having experienced the rest of the Dahmer transmedia story world, that's what gives this moment his eeriness. For the kids in the scene, it's just like, ugh, what's he doing with that fish? We know it's because he wants to see what the insides look like. The point of the biopic, says Bingham, is to, quote, enter the biographical subject into the pantheon of cultural mythology, end quote. Jeffrey Dahmer, before this film was released in 2017, was already a part of cultural mythology. His crimes and his death have already been cemented in popular culture by the sheer volume of media text about him. And as we've seen and discussed already, and as David Schmid writes about, Dahmer is a celebrity. The film My Friend Dahmer makes little sense if the rest of the story is not known, as the film recreates Dahmer watching a jogger, stroking little handfuls of bird bones, keeping bones in jars or in his house, and stabbing and slashing at a fish. None of that is really of note unless the rest of the tale is known. So a kid was watching a jogger, so a kid likes to keep bones, so a kid was weird with a fish. Doesn't really mean anything, does it, unless we know what followed. So taken in totality, and with the privileged knowledge of hindsight, Dahmer's struggles at high school should have raised the alarm. In My Friend Dahmer, though, they're not in totality, and they are separate instances against a backdrop of a troubled teenager and relatively unremarkable high school years. Joannou and McIntyre characterised the biopic structure as following a, quote, more or less unproblematic historical trajectory, I can't say that word, trajectory? of the individual towards the achievement by which he or she is best known to the public, end quote. So there's a lot of words to unpack in that if we're thinking about serial killer biopics. So what Jeffrey Dahmer is best known for, his achievements, are the appalling details of his crimes. My Friend Dahmer follows the more or less unproblematic trajectory towards his first murder. that final year of high school. So aside from slashing a fish when he should have put it back, or waiting in the tree line with a baseball bat with the intention to knock out a jogger, the journey's relatively unproblematic, wouldn't you say? I mean, he didn't actually knock out the jogger, did he? Because the jogger didn't run past that day, but... So only with the hindsight that we have do the film's many sort of aha moments make sense. The film ends with Dahmer picking up a hitchhiking Stephen Hicks, who sadly became Dahmer's first victim. So we know from Dahmer's own confessions that it was never his full intention to kill Hicks. He had a fantasy of picking up a hitchhiker, sure, but the intent to kill is less clear. So we might call this then, in these sort of markers of the biopic, a non-achievement. The failure of a desired goal. Dahmer's desired goal was to have a male companion, or a lover, or a partner. So my friend Dahmer takes us on the journey, the trajectory, to his first non-achievement, and knowing all that follows, my friend Dahmer and all the other serial killer films that I listed earlier, they're perhaps better understood as anti-biopics. Idols of consumption and idols of production are films following people with genuine achievements, people who deserve to be idolised on film. Anti-biopics, as idols of murder, are films about people who do not deserve this privilege. Alright, so we know then, My Friend Dahmer, anti-biopic, good. My Friend Dahmer presents the final year of his life before he crossed the line from troubled teenager to murderer. My Friend Dahmer presents multiple shortcuts to meaning, which require an existing knowledge of what Dahmer did as an adult, the aha moments. Via the summarising of, says Rosenstone, quote, vast amounts of data, which symbolises the complexities that otherwise could not be shown, including images that are at once invented and true in that they impart an overall meaning of the past that can be verified, documented, or reasonably argued. End quote. My Friend Dahmer opens with a school bus filled with local teens. Dahmer gazes out of the window, alone, as the other kids on the bus chat to each other. The bus drives past the jogger, and wanting to watch him for more than the fleeting glimpse as the bus roars past allows, Dahmer gets up and goes to the back window of the bus. Dahmer gets to look at the jogger for a few more moments before the bus driver yells at him to sit back down. So here's the film's first aha moment, right there in the opening scene, the infamous jogger. He's introduced, and it's compressing and summarising the vast amount of time that Dahmer spent fantasising about that particular man. Later, at school, Dahmer walks down the hall to class, and he's bumped by jocks calling him a loser in the hall. Dahmer gets to science class, and the teacher tells Durf to go and sit with Dahmer, so that Dahmer has a lab partner. Durf is unimpressed, but he drags himself over to sit at Dahmer's lab desk. As Durf sits down, Dahmer is taken aback and stares at him. The camera slowly creeps in on Dahmer's puzzled face as he looks Durf up and down, before finally settling his gaze on Durf's torso. Dahmer then turns to look behind him at a dead suckling pig preserved in a glass jar high up on a shelf. In a preceding scene, Dahmer has already told some local kids that he likes seeing what's inside the bodies of the roadkill that he collects in jars and dissolves in acid. In these short early sequences, My Friend Dahmer has told us through the invented imagery, these sequences that have been developed or recreated for the film, remember it's dramatised. They've told us that Dahmer is a loner, that he fantasises about joggers, and that he's having odd connective thoughts about fellow male students and dissection. Dramatised these scenes may be, but it can be verified and reasonably argued that Dahmer was having such troubling thoughts, because we can take into consideration his later actions, all the murders, and it's all verified by Dahmer himself in his confessions to all of this, which we see in Conversations with the Killer, the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes. So you can start to see all of these films and media texts coming together in aggregate to form this transmedia story world. It's a fairly standard film length, it's about an hour and 50 minutes, so it has to summarise and compress all of this data, all of this information into a few short scenes, which with the privileged position of those already in the know, us lot, is understandable and recognisable as the actions and troubled early life of a future serial killer. Let's move on to a film about everyone's favourite bullshit artist. As we know in Billy Bullshit, it's of course the return of Ted Bundy. Berlinger's 2019 film. Now, I've got lots of bones to pick with Joe Berlinger. I'm going to try my best not to get distracted by him here. Actually, at the Murder Media Symposium, I got chatting to one of the other delegates. She also has lots of bones to pick with Berlinger. So that was a really nice chat. It's like, hey, I'm not the only one. So this film, extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile, is named for the words that Judge Edward Court spoke in his post-sentencing remarks to Bundy at the end of the completely wild 1979 trial in Florida. The film is based on Liz Kendall's book, The Phantom Prince. She was Bundy's girlfriend for years and years, and I'm sure I've said before, I must have done when I was talking about Falling for a Killer, that Liz Kendall's book, The Phantom Prince, was never actually optioned for a film, which is insane. Eventually, Liz Kendall asked Berlinger, mate, what you doing? To be fair, he did eventually listen to her and take her notes on board, And like I've said in series 1, episode whatever, Falling for a Killer is much better. It was episode 3, I believe. Anyway, go back and listen to it. But we're going to talk about Extremely Wicked. Let's hear the trailer.
Do you remember the night we met?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been witness to the unspeakable horrors of the defendant's heinous crimes. You have seen ghastly injuries, smashed-in faces, broken jaws.
Will the defendant please rise?
For years, I've carried this guilt that I'm to blame for everything. If only I hadn't trusted you.
Promise you'll never leave me, Liz.
It's about another missing girl, isn't it? Ted, did you do it?
No.
We've got a very disturbed, sick individual.
You'll be the first nationally televised trial in history.
You look nice, partner.
I'm disguised as an attorney today.
I get very scared, but, he's also really dreamy.
There are things you don't know that will shock you beyond your worst nightmares.
It's all a lie.
It is a capital murder case, and you are skating on thin ice.
This is about catching a monster.
I wish I could take it all back. What about me? I love you. Get out!
The killings were extremely wicked, shockingly evil, vile.
Did you do these things, Ted?
This is all gonna end.
It's only gonna end with the truth.
Extremely Wicked tells us the story of Ted Bundy and Liz Kendall during the years in which Ted was killing. It shows us how they met, their developing relationship, and the pressures of Ted's arrest, accusations and trial. It shows us the stress that this puts on Liz, and the film shows us her struggles with giving Ted's name to the police and her struggles with alcoholism. So I'd like to note here, as I'm sure I've noted before, the bravery of Liz Kendall in going to the police. I don't think we can ever talk about this without acknowledging that. She was very brave. Well done. Extremely Wicked is a companion text to Berlinger's 2019 Netflix documentary, Conversations with the Killer, the Ted Bundy Tapes. And I've talked about that in Series 1 as well, Episode 2, I think. I don't know. Let's just, say it is. Both Conversations with the Killer and Extremely Wicked were released the same year. Conversations details the horrific crimes and hears from the mostly men who were involved in the case. Extremely Wicked tells this story partly from Liz Kendall's point of view and steers away from the gory details of the murders. Instead, Extremely Wicked presents a romantic version of Ted Bundy. I know, try not to be sick. Which is exacerbated by the casting of Zac Efron. Zac Efron, in this film anyway, does resemble Bundy a little bit, especially when dressed in the same piss yellow roll-neck sweaters that Bundy was such a fan of. Efron is of course most known for his role as Troy Bolton in High School Musical. Efron is a heartthrob, he's handsome, he's charming, and he's got many adoring female fans. Ted Bundy was also, apparently, that's in capitals in my script, apparently handsome, charming, and as we can see in the trial footage, with many adoring female fans. As another example of the anti-biopic, Extremely Wicked exhibits a version of Ted that is romantic and in love. The film is told from Kendall's perspective, or claims to be anyway, so perhaps this is the version of the Ted that she wanted him to be. This version of Ted Bundy is a man who, when escaped from prison twice, lest we fucking forget, when he was escaping, he was doing it in desperation to be back with the woman he loved. So the film film paints this for us by recreating montages of Ted jumping off the top bunk in his cell to prepare for the 2-story jump from the window of the courthouse during his first escape, and it's intercut with Ted repeatedly calling Liz from the prison payphone. In combining these two actions, Extremely Wicked is painting Ted as a man who wants to be reunited with his love. But in the film, and in reality, Ted just scuttled off to the cold Colorado mountains before being arrested again 5 days later. When he escaped, again, second time, he again didn't return to Liz. He went to Florida and killed again. Liz never questions why he doesn't return to her, and, she was quite worried that he might, so the presentation of Bundy as lovesick never really reveals itself in the action of the two being reunited. The film goes to great and tedious lengths to show us how handsome Ted Bundy was, so as if casting Zac Efron wasn't enough, in Extremely Wicked, one evening Ted visits his library to study. He sits at a desk where lots of young women are also studying. The camera takes time to show us each student as they look up through their lashes and smile at the handsome man who has sat with them. Soon enough, though, someone recognises him from the press coverage and the library security guard chucks him out. After Bundy escapes out of the courthouse window, he changes his clothes in an alleyway to evade capture. He saunters down the street and passes 2 sets of pairs of young women, both of which stare and giggle at Bundy. He smiles back at them, basking in the attention of the young women. Now, attractiveness is of course subjective, I know, but the frequent tagging of Bundy as handsome continues this myth of Bundy as this captivating, alluring, and as we'll see later, almost superhuman man. Extremely Wicked recreates scenes which already exist as actualities, from news footage mainly, and these are scenes which Berlinger used in conversations with the killer. Small changes are made to these recreations in Extremely Wicked, which function as visual clues to the attempt to flip the story, to kind of tell it from another perspective, from Liz's perspective. When Bundy is indicted by Sheriff Kit Sarvis in front of the press, while the words that they, Bundy and Kit Sarvis, speak are word for word from the newsreel of this moment, in the film, the recreation of the layout of the scene is flipped around 180 degrees, in a mirror of how the scene actually played out. In the real footage, the elevator from which Bundy emerges is on the right. In the film, he emerges from an elevator on the left. Extremely Wicked recreates scenes that we know happened but are not able to be seen because there are moments not already mediated, and that's saying something because there's an awful lot of Ted Bundy that is mediated. So the scenes that we know happened but not already to see, they're not already shot for TV news reports or for the later courtroom footage. So the aforementioned jumping from the top bunk and then later Bundy removing the light fitting to escape prison through the ceiling of his cell, we know that these happened, but there's no documented footage. So Extremely Wicked has to fill in these moments, taking us into that in-between, the pockets of time between murders. The film provides the footage of Liz and Ted's romance, which is presented and summarised by snapshot scenes of Ted, Liz and Molly at Christmas, or Ted teaching Molly to ride a bike. These scenes resemble 9mm home movies, rendered in a 4:3 ratio with sprocket holes visible up the sides. In doing this, Extremely Wicked fills in the gaps with created and dramatised imagery of what was previously only described in words in Liz Kendall's book, and it animates moments which were previously only moments caught in still photograph. In another montage, a whistle-stop tour of the developing romance between Bundy and Kendall is intercut with real news reports and news footage of the disappearance of Georgianne Hawkins, Denise Nasland and Janice Ott, and this gives the film its reality frame, reminding us that as an anti-biopic, as a portrait of their relationship, it has a basis in a horrific reality. Despite the basis in reality, however, Extremely Wicked still does perpetuate the Bundy myth, a myth also sustained in conversations with the killer. In Extremely Wicked, Liz and Ted visit a dog shelter with an eye to adopt a family dog. Liz sees a caged dog, he's panting and wagging his tail. Liz likes the look of this dog, it seems friendly, so Liz crouches down to get a closer look at the animal. As Ted does the same, the dog stops panting and wagging and stares directly into Ted's eyes. The dog is alert, it growls and it barks and it bares its teeth before whining and stepping back. Perplexed, Liz and Ted look at each other. That this dog can somehow sense that Ted is bad, or that somehow Ted unwittingly communicates with the dog that he is a vicious killer too, pushes the myth that Bundy was almost superhuman. But he was not, was he? He was just a man, and an unremarkable one at that. Alright, we'll leave it there for this week. 2 serial killer biopics, or anti-biopics as I'm calling them. Next week, and once again, I don't know what's coming, so I don't know when I'm recording it and what I'm doing. If there is a delay between episodes, I'll let you know on the socials. There might be delays this series because of work getting in the way. But as usual, thanks for listening. Like, share, subscribe, review, all that stuff, it really helps. Follow the Murder Media Project on Instagram, murdermedia81, or Facebook, or email murdermedia81@gmail.com. Goodbye, have a good week, and I'll be back with some other Murder Media.